So we're on Twitter. I know, right? Twitter, the worst place in the world to be. Let's go.
Oh no, a black samurai on the new Assassin's Creed? Japanese here, sit your white ass down. So I was scrolling on Instagram and saw this post. I went to the comment field and there were a lot of white men saying that this is cultural appropriation. And me, as a Japanese, thought, but Yasuke actually existed. So to make sure my fellow Japanese people are on the same side with me, I went to X and looked it up in Japanese. And yes, they were on my side, saying that Yasuke actually existed and it's funny that foreigners don't like it. In 1627, an Italian missionary, Alessandro Valignani.
I'm probably not going to watch her video because I've watched it and it's kind of short. So, you know, the people here kind of cut his ass and they're disrespectful. I'm not reading these comments. Okay. But there is what I believe this one statue somewhere. Not sure where this statue is, but I've been seeing that a lot. So let's continue. Here we go. I like this guy. He's good at his information.
今日も始めましょう。
The content of my videos are based on personal studies and experiences. There is no intentions of denying or theorizing and cultural aspects. Okay. Yasuke.
Let me first start from the most famous foreign samurai, Yasuke. In the Civil War era, many slaves were brought to Japan by European merchants and diplomats.
Okay.
Yasuke was one of those slaves that was brought to Japan by Italian Jesuit. He was born in Africa, where Mozambique is now.
Okay.
Yasuke met the strongest samurai at that time, Oda Nobunaga, in 1581. Oda Nobunaga is the first samurai that almost conquered all of Japan. He was called the Devil due to his aggressive attitude and violent nature. This powerful samurai was very interested in his African slave, so he asked the Italian Jesuit to let him stay in Japan. The slave didn't have a name, so Nobunaga decided to call him Yasuke. Yasuke was 182 centimeters in a
5'9".
time when the average height of a man was 154 centimeters. Also, in some historical records, it is explained that Yasuke had strength worth 10 men. He was also a very honest and hardworking man.
Okay.
So he was officially allowed by Oda Nobunaga to carry katanas like samurais and own his own house.
Okay, that's something that is part of the history. But where this thing start to differ is if he was a retainer, because he did hold a sword, Nobunaga's sword, but I don't think Nobunaga would just let him hold his sword to be a retainer. But let's continue. And he had a house. Okay.
Yasuke would even hold Nobunaga's weaponry from time to time, which was
From time
a
to
very
time.
honorable job.
From time to time doesn't make him a permanent retainer, but from time to time.
Because it meant that he was truly trusted. This means that Yasuke was in a much higher rank than most Japanese at that time. Oda Nobunaga died in a fire set by a traitor subordinate in 1582. Yasuke was staying at the same temple that night. Yasuke ran to tell the allies that there is a traitor and to protect the son of Oda Nobunaga. He was defeated and caught, but was released due to his loyalty. There are no historical records about what happened to him afterwards.
Which is a problem, which seems to be a problem. There's nothing else left.
Yasuke is very popular and famous in Japan, so there are many books, mangas, and movies about
Many books and mangas and movies. Okay.
him. If you're interested, I hope you can check them out.
Shout outs to bro here. His information's always good. We're moving on to Clownfish. Shout through. So let's not. This is a Yosuke day, y'all. I'm going Black Samurai all day, y'all.
Big Assassin's Creed game, and it's what longtime fans have been waiting for since near the very beginning when we were all introduced to Altair, eagle diving into a heap of hay. That's right, Assassin's Creed Shadows will be set in feudal Japan. In retrospect, with the romanticized illustrations of shinobi and samurai, it seems like an obvious place to take the franchise to.
I do gotta agree with one thing with Ulterior though, and I might have to pinpoint this and come back to it and edit this in the video. But I do understand a lot of people may not agree with what are they called again? What are these niggas called again? Ubisoft has done. But I do look at it from maybe a positive point of view. I do think Ubisoft is not trying to be malicious, but a lot of people's like, oh, they're just doing this for identity politics. I do think, and I do believe Ubisoft wants to tackle the conversation of seeing Japan through a foreigner's eyes. And we could do that in any other game, but right now it seems to be very pinpointed.
Particularly when other critically acclaimed games and media shared a similar Japanese setting. But a lot of people are actually angry about this upcoming Assassin's Creed game. Why? Because one of the playable protagonists is Yasuke, an African man in traditional samurai armor, featured alongside Naoi, a Japanese woman who is a ninja from the Iga province, well known for its shinobi history. But an African man in feudal Japan. Have game developers gone woke, as the angry people say? Is this not disrespectful of Japanese people and their culture? Why didn't they just make an African Assassin's Creed game? For a lot of people unfamiliar with this piece of history, yes, there actually was an African man who entered into the service of the famed daimyo Oda Nobunaga in the late 16th century. And yes, many Japanese people who are confused over why so many non-Japanese people are freaking out over this African samurai know about Yasuke. In fact, there are entire films, games, comics, and art pieces from Japan that depict Yasuke, but perhaps Oda Nobunaga was ahead of the curve and really did onboard him as a DEI hire. Joking aside, before I tackle the topic of Yasuke as a historian, I want to address the thousands of angry comments remarking on the historical accuracy or authenticity or lack of in Assassin's Creed Shadows or really any of the other games. For those of you who aren't familiar with Assassin's Creed, it's basically sci-fi, ancient aliens, and alternative history in a melting pot that's produced really interesting and sometimes very underwhelming stories since 2007. 2007? Man, I feel old. It was like experiencing what your ancestors did through a machine called the Animus, Leonardo da Vinci being involved with inventing weapons for the Order of Assassins in their centuries-old war against Knights Templar, a precursor civilization that genetically engineered humanity, but also lives on through a form of possessive reincarnation, and the implication that Hitler was killed by an assassin are such things you encounter in the Assassin's Creed universe. And it's
Which is pretty kind of cool. But let's move forward.
It's all good fun. Don't get me wrong. It can be fun, alternative, and conspirational history mixed with sci-fi, and there are painstaking efforts by the developers in trying to make sure real pieces of history in these games are there for gamers to learn about in the form of architecture, cultures, food, and people. And they work with historians. Fun fact, I know a historian colleague of mine who helped consult on Assassin's Creed Mirage. And another fun fact, Ubisoft was so confident in their historical work that after the Notre Dame Cathedral burnt down in Paris, they actually offered to help with the reconstruction. So yes, there is a respect of what one could deem as proper history in these games, but that respect is also accompanied by the different versions of the famous loading screen that loaded in the first Assassin's Creed, which says, inspired by historical events and characters, this work of fiction was designed, developed, and produced by a multicultural team. So while there is an awesome transmission of historical and cultural lessons through the medium of gaming, Assassin's Creed can also get pretty insane and needlessly over the top in terms of how it tells its story, to the point I personally feel an African man in Japan is the least of my concerns lore-wise. As for why the developers made the creative...
Okay, so he's just like, hey, an African man is not where I draw the line because I think a lot of y'all a bunch of bitches, but I get it. Okay. I respect that man on what he says. Fuck.
Decision to go with Yasuke as one of the playable characters, when in contrast, the previous playable protagonists were basically fictional or somehow related to the region the games were based in. I'm sure a lot of people will look at it in different ways. Personally, I'd venture to say that it was just a bold, creative decision rather than some nefarious attempt to force black people into gaming or Japanese culture. Here's an incredibly rare instance, for example, of a non-East Asian foreigner in feudal Japan that we don't know much about. He entered the inner circle of the Oda Nobunaga court, and then he just disappears from the pages of recorded history just as things get extremely heated, not only in Japan, but the entire region, to the point that the devastating Imjin War between Ming China, Korea, and Japan commences in 1592. We don't know exactly where Yasuke came from or what his life was like before he was enslaved. We don't know everything that happened with him, and so there's much more creative room for Assassin's Creed to say, okay, here's our formula of alternative history.
You know what sucks? They don't know what's happening. They don't know anything. Hold on, I'll be right back.
Here's what happened to him. Here's how he was secretly a part of the Order of Assassins as we know it. Here's what he did behind the scenes, and I think that in itself is classic Assassin's Creed. And of course, when we discuss Yasuke, I feel like a lot of people are just completely forgetting about Naoi, you know, the other protagonist in front of him who is Japanese.
I've been saying that! What about the girl?
So it's not like you only play a black character in a Japanese setting. To be honest with you, my main concerns are, after my review of Assassin's Creed Mirage last year, is if the gameplay experience and mechanics for Shadows are going to be actually good or better streamlined, because gameplay-wise, I haven't been super impressed for a long time by Assassin's Creed. I'm not sure how they're going to implement gameplay mechanics for Yasuke and Naoi, but it just feels like to me maybe they're exploring a character you control for just brawls and fights, while the other character has a more assassination or sneaky playstyle. Furthermore, the price tags that
But then I'm like, I don't want him as a brawler because that's just a waste of skills. What if he left being, I would have liked it if the story was Yasuke, after Yasuke is done being an assassin, being a samurai, he joins the church. The church is connected to the Templars or connected to the other order, and then he becomes an assassin. Come on, bro, that makes sense.
that come with Assassin's Creed Shadows are definitely concerning, though I think these are topics for a different video. So why don't we talk more about Yasuke and the historical context in which he was thrust into. At first, a lot of angry people couldn't believe that Yasuke even existed. Well, we know Yasuke existed because he was written about by his contemporaries. He is mentioned in the Shinjo Koki, a set of chronicles and diary entries written by another samurai by the name of Otaguchi, who served under Oda Nobunaga. We can also find brief mentions of Yasuke in the writings of Jesuit missionaries like Louis Fra and Francois Solier, the latter who claims that Yasuke hailed from present-day Mozambique and was brought by the Jesuit missionaries from present-day India to Japan. Yasuke is also mentioned in the diaries of Matsudara Iyatada. We even have the recorded...
So he was mentioned in people's diaries and their languages. Okay, and he was mentioned by another samurai.
encounter and interactions between Oda Nobunaga, known as a great unifier of Japan, and 26 or 27-year-old Yasuke, who's described as a very strong man, like a cow. There's also descriptions of Yasuke's skin being like black ink, which Oda Nobunaga couldn't fathom. And Yasuke was such a sensation that huge crowds would try to look at him, and when Yasuke demonstrated his strength of 10 men by successfully wrestling an opponent, the Jesuits handed over this African man to Nobunaga, who was reportedly a fan of wrestling, and then he was named Yasuke. Additionally, Yasuke is not the only instance of a non-Japanese samurai or bushi in history, nor was he even the only African in Japan at the time. There are documented Ming and Korean samurai like...
You know what stops me is like, oh, I thought he was the only African nigga in Japan. I was like, nah, he was not the only African dude in Japan or documented, which is interesting. I like how these type of titles go because you never know who was documented, who was not, who was there. You know, it's kind of cool when they kind of break it down for you. That's what I see. That's what I see. It's kind of cool if they break it down for you. That's what I think. But let's continue.
Kim Yo-char. Englishman William Adams is also a notable one for those of you who have read Shogun. There were also a couple of Italian and Dutch samurai recorded in the service of the Hideyoshi court. Once people online accepted the existence of Yasuke, the argument became, okay, he may have existed, but he was no samurai because he wasn't Japanese. He was just a retainer, glorified secretary, or page based on the Googling people were doing. There seems to be a narrow fixation here with a lot of people on foreign versus native, or nobility versus peasant, when it comes to the idea of samurai or bushi or warrior, two concepts which at times intersect or deviate from one another. The main debate seems to not be if Yasuke was a samurai or not, but if he fits what people's idea of a samurai is. The historical fact is...
I like how he says people's idea of what a samurai is. Because you gotta think about it. What is your idea of a samurai, right? Japanese dude walking around, slicing niggas' heads off, powerful swordsman. Like, you really gotta think about that closely.
Is that the concept of samurai and the subclasses within the samurai have always been in flux politically, and socially, depending on the time periods of Japanese history. A lot of the more modern conception of the samurai as a born noble or knight comes from the Edo period from the 17th to 19th centuries, and vestiges of some teachings and ideas from previous eras where the samurai was emerging as both a class and military power that wrested political control from the emperorship. The time
Right. Yeah. That's one thing that catches me off guard when he says this was the title of the samurai at that time, especially if they're taking power from the emperor, because eventually Commodore Matthew Perry came and shot the samurai and then gave the power back to the emperor.
period that Yasuke experienced was the time of the Sengoku Jidai, or the Warring States period from the 15th to 16th century. We're
Yes.
talking about one of the most turbulent and violent times in Japanese history. Brother against brother, uncle against nephew, lord against servant, rebellions, wars, battles, social and political upheavals. It was not a peaceful time, and very rarely
Civil War, nigga. It is straight Civil War at that time. It's kind of like the American Civil War. I realize we're not the only fucking people that had a civil war in this country, but Japan is also a place that's had their own dealings and their own problems with shit just going down, which I kind of admit is kind of cool, because at least you guys had your own problems, and that kind of shows relation with America and Japan and why we mirror each other so much.
do social or economic strata remain fixed or stable during such times in human societies. Such was also the case for the samurai class and identity. The biggest example is, of course, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, who became the de facto ruler of Japan after his lord Oda Nobunaga was betrayed and killed. Hideyoshi was not born a samurai or into royalty or nobility. He was in fact a peasant, but he became a samurai and daimyo and then imperial regent. Now for Yasuke, we do know from the aforementioned
What?
Shinshokoki that Oda Nobunaga granted Yasuke his own residence, his own weapons with a decorative sheath, and a stipend. One of the key things here is that weapons
Stipend.
weren't granted to just anyone by a daimyo or lord, and that you were
True.
expected to serve at the cost of your life and reputation in their services after receiving such arms.
So that's a pinpoint right there. A samurai, a daimyo. No one just gives out a weapon just cause. I give you a domain. No. You're supposed to serve your life and pledge your allegiance to me and die by my side, basically. And Yasuke didn't die by his side, but basically hold the fucking door and fight like a man type of energy. Which, don't get me wrong, is kind of crazy, but that's what happened. So let's rewind a little bit.
Mentioned Shinshokoki that Oda Nobunaga granted Yasuke his own residence, his own weapons with a decorative sheath, and a stipend. One of the key things here is that weapons weren't granted to just anyone by a daimyo or lord, and that you were expected to serve at the cost of your life and reputation in their services after receiving such arms.
Okay.
Yasuke did indeed serve in at least one military campaign that we know of under Oda Nobunaga after entering service. Additionally,
So he served in one military campaign under Nobunaga's service. One. So that means he did serve in Nobunaga's army. He didn't just hold his fucking sword.
the word stipend is being used within the specific context of paying retainers, or basically payrolling the samurai in service of Nobunaga and other lords. It's not a word that's used for contractors or simple servants, as a stipend granted to samurai was used mainly for maintaining a military retinue and the land granted to them, if any could be granted. In fact, Parallel Pain from the Ask Historian subreddit has a great breakdown of how this word is used in relation to samurai in the pages of the Shinsho Koki, if you'd like to check these examples out.
Maybe.
Lastly, it's also been recorded that Oda Nobunaga entrusted his weapons to Yasuke and made him his weapons bearer, in addition to making him a warrior bodyguard. This isn't some sort of Fallout thing where the Brotherhood of Steel bosses around their squires while giving them a big bag of weapons and ammunition to carry all the time. No, this is a very important gesture within this particular context. It is a complete entrusting of one's life to somebody else. It's not something you hand to a mere secretary or...
Is not. That's why everybody was like, oh, he was holding the sword, or he was a squire or a jester. No, nigga. He was holding my bro's weapons. no one just he was given this title, and obviously he couldn't just hold the niggas' weapons. So there's more to this. You know what I'm saying? There's always more to this. That's my problem with people that was like, this nigga was not just this, and this. He was more than just a retainer. He was a samurai. He was a warrior. He did serve. He did hold Nobunaga's weapons. But there was more to that. It always is.
A page, or even to a random bodyguard. It also signifies not just how important Yasuke was in the inner circle of Nobunaga's court, but also how much higher ranked he was in relation to others, Japanese or not. So was Yasuke a samurai or type of samurai? Yes. It's hard to dismiss a lot of the historical peripheral evidence surrounding this obscure figure from history, but based on what we do know about other non-Japanese samurai, the cultural context of the period, and of course the eccentricities of Oda Nobunaga, it's a bit foolhardy to claim otherwise. In the end, we don't know what happened to Yasuke. We do know that he fought the Akechi traders during the Honnoji Nohen, or the Honnoji incident, when Oda Nobunaga committed suicide after being betrayed by Akechi Mitsuhide. We do know that Yasuke was captured by said traders and then spared with his wounds being treated by Jesuit missionaries. Louis Fra would write 5 months later, after Yasuke was treated, that Yasuke did not lose his life. And I assume that this may be the part of his life where we explore Yasuke's alternative history sometime in Assassin's Creed Shadow, along with the story of Naoi. I hope you guys enjoyed this.
See, I like that better. He said it that we're looking at Yasuke after serving Nobunaga. After. That makes sense. We're not looking at Yasuke when he's serving Nobunaga now. It wouldn't make sense for him to be doing anything recklessly stupid to serve anybody or doing any dumb shit right now. It wouldn't make any sense. It kind of wouldn't at all. Personally, that's how I see it. But I like that. I like that breakdown.
Shit.
Getting on drum.
When's
You little niggas gonna stop acting like my shit ain't the grill.
the last
Some of
one?
you niggas get your front teeth for grills. And I ain't talking about the contract. I
Ain't loving these fake hoes. Room smelling like 8 switches. Room service like 2K. NBA, I'm ballin', nigga. All them niggas falling like all them niggas. Talking shit, I saw them niggas. Now they daughter want a picture. Rough, ain't it? Fuck famous.
Yeah, man.
Niggas too real, got the most haters. Wrote a story, so Stephen Curry. How it feel to be golden.